Happy Labor Day, everyone. It's a beautiful day here in Waco, and so I thought I'd film this particular installment outdoors. On this Labor Day, I wanted to talk to you today about what else? Labor. There's been quite a flurry of activity over the past month. I can't frankly remember the last time the labor movement in the U.S. had such a big month. There was the recall efforts against the Wisconsin state senators, 6 of them Republicans who voted for the controversial bill that limited collective bargaining rights of certain public sector employees, and then 2 Democrats who really blew off work and left the state instead of standing up for what they believed in. And 2 of the Republican senators were defeated, but fortunately the unions did not succeed in flipping control of the Senate to the Democrats. So the Republicans still have the majority in the Wisconsin State Senate, despite the loss of 2 courageous members who stood up for what was right instead of doing the easy, popular thing. The Verizon strike, the thousands of Verizon employees went on strike. I covered that in a separate video last month, and also the allegations of sabotage. The FBI was investigating several attacks on Verizon, severing of phone lines and sort, but I didn't realize how far the union thugs' tactics had gone. According to Wall Street Journal, this is from August 10th. Over the past few days, strikers have fired a BB gun at a non-striking worker in the Bronx, pushed another into a scaffolding and injured his arm in Albany, crowded around a Manhattan manhole where workers were sent to splice a cable and refused to leave when police were called, according to the company's legal filing in New York. It says pickets also blocked postal trucks from getting into a Verizon billing center in the Long Island community of Massapequa and gathered by the dozens to harangue people going into and leaving various Verizon locations. And they're not alone. In fact, Investors Business Daily reported on an incident last month in Toledo where, actually I'm not sure if it occurred in Toledo, but this guy, John King, the owner of King Electrical Services, was shot by some guy whom King caught spray painting the word scab on his Hummer. And when last I checked, the shooter had not been apprehended, so we're not sure that this was a union supporter or someone. But, well, it is definitely an attack on an employer, a non-union employer. In fact, IBD also pointed out that King runs a small business employing 40 people at high wages with good benefits. This despite the fact that his workers are not unionized. And they detailed incidents of violence on the part of labor unions and union activists over the past 20 years. Take a look at this chart. Okay, well, moving on. But the big news, all of this is disturbing, but the really big news last month were actually 3 separate rulings by the National Labor Relations Board. For those of you who don't know, the N.L.R.B is an agency in the executive branch of government. It was created in 1934 by FDR. It's composed of 5 board members and a general counsel, all of whom are appointed by the president. And, well, I'll let Doug McElway, or whoever did this report, explain it.
The Obama White House notably failed to win passage in Congress of the Employee Free Choice Act, or card check, a measure that would have made it easier to form unions in non-union workplaces. But a series of decisions handed down this month by the National Labor Relations Board, whose Democratic majority reflects President Obama's appointments, has effectively accomplished through regulatory action what the Congress rejected.
This has been perhaps the most activist board in at least the last 40 years. And activist in a way that clearly and significantly favors unions.
Overturning its own ruling from the Bush years, the N.L.R.B. withdrew from employees this week their ability to challenge immediately an employer's decision to recognize a vote in favor of unionization accomplished by a card check system rather than secret ballot. The board also ruled in favor of smaller bargaining units, like nursing assistants at a long-term care facility. That decision will likely have broad impact across all industries. And while the country braced for Irene, the N.L.R.B. quietly ordered employers to post new signs, fonts and colors to be selected by the board itself, informing workers of their rights. That decision is seen by some as the board's greatest assertion of authority because it came absent any particular petition by a union and any specific allegation of unfair labor practices by a company.
Now, that last ruling, you may have heard the one about requiring employers to post notices or bulletins in the workplace, they drew attention to that because it seemed like there wasn't any particular impetus for that ruling. And let's see here, Anthony Riedel, I'm honestly not sure how that's pronounced, of the National Right to Work Legal Foundation pointed out, current federal law already requires employers to post notices of workers' rights if a labor law is violated. And while it seems, somewhat harmless to require them to post notices of workers' rights even in the absence of any violation, Riedel pointed out that union officials are not required to issue information about workers' rights to refrain from union membership or opt out of union dues. So it's a bit of a it's not a two-way street, it seems, or at least it does seem quite unfair. And it's interesting because the National Labor Relations Act was Congress's attempt back in the 30s to try and create a level playing field. Workers' unions were around before the 20s and 30s, but they weren't very powerful, and back then a good argument can be made that they were necessary. You had people working long hours, terrible abuses of employees, child labor, working conditions that were very dangerous, unsafe. Nobody should have to work in. But I'm not sure where most labor unions in America, especially the very big ones, AFL-CIO, Teamsters, the teachers' unions, when they actually went from primarily being concerned with the welfare of the workers to mainly being concerned about power and throwing their weight around and exercising that power. I think it was probably a gradual change over time, but certainly even back in the early days when the labor movement was really starting to pick up steam, you had a division or a sharp contrast between the heads of various labor organizations, between the moderates and the radicals. Compare, for example, Samuel Gompers with Big Bill Haywood. Today, though, it seems like the radicals are definitely in the majority as far as union leaders go. Take a look at James Hoffa, son of the infamous Jimmy Hoffa, the Teamsters president who mysteriously disappeared in 1975 and was never found. Take a look at what he said earlier today.
Firebrand Teamsters president Jim Hoffa accused the Tea Party of waging war on workers, and He called on union members to remember that next November.
Let's take these son of a bitches out and give America back to America where we belong. Thank you very much.
So that took place at a rally in Detroit that President Obama was also in attendance. Obviously, they're trying to rile up his supporters in the labor movement. And I think it is dangerous that how much power these union bosses have. Wisconsin, the thing that really irked them with the Wisconsin law was that the government would no longer take union dues out of workers' paychecks. I don't think anyone should ever be compelled to join a union. I live in Texas, which is a right-to-work state, and it's great. I've never, at least no one I know personally, has ever complained about working conditions in Texas or attributed that to it being a right-to-work state. It's yeah, you know, we're pretty satisfied with the quality of life here, but obviously not a majority of states are not right-to-work states, and they still have the union shop, and it's very dangerous when you can be harassed, when you can be forced to join a union, and now, as you just heard in that story, the N.L.R.B. has effectively stripped workers' rights to a secret ballot. And I want to close with this. I want to point out that you heard pretty much it's still going on now, but almost, especially since the 2010 elections, people on the left talking about how dangerous the Tea Party is, and how it's dangerous when a minority, a very small minority, controls the debate and can wield so much power, and when we're letting them, drive the country. Labor unions are arguably an even smaller minority than the Tea Party. I think less than 10% of the labor force is unionized, or at least 10% of American workers belong to a union. It's more in government than in the private sector. Perhaps somebody could look up those statistics. I don't know. Anyway, obviously, as a conservative, I certainly believe that we ought to be constantly on guard against the tyranny of the majority. But that doesn't mean that, the principle of minority rights doesn't mean giving an obscene amount of power to people who not only represent or do not represent the interests of a majority of the populace, but who actually advocate policies that on balance are harmful to the majority of Americans. I'll pick up on this theme probably in future videos, but on this Labor Day, a holiday I'm well aware came about because of the American labor movement, let's remember that there's a difference between hardworking individuals and who actually do their job, who are responsible, who are dedicated to their work, and self-aggrandizing union bosses who really just want to make themselves feel powerful, assert their power, assert their dominance, wield influence. That seemed less than eloquent. I don't know. I'll probably cut that out. Be sure to check out my website, and until next time, don't mess with the right-wing genius.